The blood drained from my face as I stared at the credit card statement. 6 cards opened in my name, $147,000 in debt. And a signature I recognized all too well. My own mother had stolen my identity. This is the story of how I uncovered her betrayal, and the moment justice finally caught up with her, on what should have been the proudest day of my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The screen of my laptop cast a harsh blue glow across my small apartment as I scrolled through the credit report. Each line felt like another knife twisting in my chest. Nordstrom, Saks Fifth Avenue. Luxury hotels in Miami. First-class flights to Las Vegas. A lifestyle I couldn't afford but was somehow financing through credit cards I never applied for. My hands trembled as reality sank in. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't identity theft from some anonymous hacker. This was betrayal from the one person who was supposed to protect me. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 24 years old and a forensic accounting student with a painful secret. Growing up, my mother Diane was always the life of the party, charismatic, beautiful, and perpetually broke. After my father left when I was 7, it became just the two of us navigating life's challenges together. At least, that's what I thought. What I didn't realize was that behind her warm smiles and encouraging words, my mother had been constructing an elaborate web of financial deceit with me at the center. "This can't be happening," I whispered to myself, the words disappearing into the empty room. I'd been preparing for my final exams, counting down the days until graduation, when a simple pre-employment credit check revealed the devastating truth. According to the report, I had been living a double life as a big spender with expensive taste, a far cry from my actual existence as a scholarship student eating ramen and working part-time to make ends meet. My roommate Jessica found me still staring at the screen an hour later, tears streaming down my face. "Sarah, what's wrong?" she asked, dropping her backpack by the door and rushing to my side. I couldn't speak, could only point at the screen where my financial life lay in ruins. Jessica's gasp told me she understood the gravity of what we were looking at. "But how is this possible? You're the most financially responsible person I know," she said, scrolling through the report. "You don't even have a credit card." "My mother," I finally managed to say, the words burning my throat. "Look at the addresses. Look at the phone numbers listed as contact information. They're all variations of hers." Jessica's eyes widened as she connected the dots. "Sarah, you need to call the police." The thought sent a wave of nausea through me. Report my own mother? The woman who had held me when I cried? Who had worked double shifts to keep a roof over our heads? Who had promised me the world even when she couldn't deliver it? But as I stared at the mounting evidence, I realized I had no choice. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a misunderstanding. This was calculated, systematic fraud spanning years. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. "I need to report identity theft," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. By my mother, what followed was a blur of police statements, credit bureau disputes, and sleepless nights. I learned that identity theft by family members, familiar fraud, as the detective called it, was more common than most people realized. Parents with access to their children's social security numbers and personal information could easily open accounts, particularly when the child had a pristine credit history with no previous activity. "You're doing the right thing," Detective Rivera assured me as I signed yet another affidavit. Her kind eyes held no judgment, only compassion. "I know this is hard, but you're not responsible for your mother's choices." Easy words to say, but nearly impossible to believe when every credit card statement, every fraudulent loan application, every forged signature felt like another betrayal of the relationship I thought we had. As the investigation deepened, so did my understanding of just how methodically my mother had exploited my identity. She hadn't just opened credit cards. She had taken out personal loans, financed a car, and even tried to purchase a condominium using my stellar credit score. The worst part wasn't the debt or the damaged credit. It was the realization that while I had been working my way through college, carefully saving every penny and planning for my future, my mother had been systematically undermining everything I was working toward. Each fraudulent transaction was a betrayal of trust, each forged signature a mockery of our relationship. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I tried to confront her, of course. 1 week after filing the police report, I drove to her apartment, rehearsing what I would say. Would she deny it? Break down and confess? Beg for forgiveness? I never got the chance to find out. When I arrived, her neighbor informed me she had left 3 days earlier with several suitcases, mentioning something about a spa retreat in Arizona. She was running. She knew what she had done, and instead of facing the consequences, she had chosen to disappear. The realization was like a physical blow. Detective Rivera wasn't surprised when I called to update her. "We see this pattern often," she explained gently. "Once identity thieves realize they've been discovered, they typically try to flee. But don't worry, we flagged her ID in the system. If she tries to board a plane or cross state lines, we'll know." What Detective Rivera couldn't possibly understand was that part of me hoped my mother would escape, would somehow avoid the consequences of her actions. Because despite everything, she was still my mother. I still remembered how she would braid my hair for school, how she kept every report card and art project, how she cried with pride when I received my college acceptance letter. How could she do this to me? I asked Dr. Patel, the campus therapist I started seeing as the investigation continued. How could she look me in the eye all these years knowing what she was doing? Dr. Patel's response was measured. "People compartmentalize, Sarah. Your mother likely justified her actions by telling herself she would pay everything back before you discovered it. Or perhaps she convinced herself she was entitled to use your credit because she raised you. The human mind is remarkably adept at rationalizing behavior we know is wrong." The weeks turned into months. Spring semester became summer, and summer faded into fall. My final year of college began under the shadow of the ongoing investigation. The credit card companies had frozen the fraudulent accounts, but resolving the debt and restoring my credit would be a lengthy process. Meanwhile, there had been no sign of my mother since her disappearance. I threw myself into my studies, finding solace in the predictable world of numbers and financial regulations. Ironically, my personal experience with fraud made me exceptionally qualified for my chosen field of forensic accounting. What once had been theoretical concepts in textbooks had become painfully real lessons written in the red ink of my credit report. "You've become one of our top students," Professor Winters commented after I presented my case study on familiar fraud. She didn't know I had used my own experience as the foundation for my research, changing only the names and specific details. "There's a certain authenticity to your understanding of how these crimes impact victims." If only she knew how authentic that understanding truly was. As graduation approached, I began receiving job offers from prestigious accounting firms. Firms that would expect me to pass a background check. Firms that would scrutinize my credit history as part of their hiring process. Despite filing all the proper fraud reports, my credit remained in shambles, a constant reminder of my mother's betrayal. "We can provide a letter explaining the situation," Detective Rivera offered when I expressed my concerns. Many employers are understanding about identity theft, especially when the victim has taken all the proper steps to address it. I wanted to believe her, but doubt crept in. Would potential employers really be willing to overlook the financial chaos attached to my name, explanation letter, or not? Would they trust me with their clients' finances when my own were in such disarray? The questions kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my apartment as another future I had carefully planned seemed to slip through my fingers. 2 weeks before graduation, I received a call from Detective Rivera. "We've located your mother," she said, without preamble. My heart lurched in my chest, a complicated mix of relief, dread, and something like hope. "Where is she? Is she okay?" I asked, surprising myself with the concern still evident in my voice. "She's in California, working at a resort under a slightly altered name. And yes, physically, she appears to be fine." Detective Rivera paused. "Sarah, we have enough evidence to make an arrest. But I wanted to speak with you first." The implication was clear. Despite everything, I was being given a choice, or at least the illusion of one. Push forward, with prosecution, or let my mother continue her life in California, away from me and the consequences of her actions. For one brief, shameful moment, I considered the latter. Wouldn't it be easier to simply cut ties, to write off the debt as the cost of freedom from this painful situation? To start fresh without the messiness of court cases and potential jail time for the woman who raised me? But then I thought about the principles I was studying to uphold, the integrity I prided myself on, the future career where I would help others navigate the devastating impacts of financial fraud. How could I stand before clients or colleagues knowing I had allowed the person who defrauded me to escape justice simply because we shared DNA? "Make the arrest," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "And Detective Rivera? I want to be there when it happens." The detective's surprise was evident even through the phone. "That's not typically how we handle these situations, Sarah. These confrontations can be volatile, unpredictable." "I need to look her in the eye," I interrupted. "I need her to see me when she realizes she can't run anymore. I've spent months feeling powerless. I need this." There was a long pause before Detective Rivera sighed. "I can't promise anything, but let me see what I can arrange." What she arranged was beyond anything I could have anticipated. The FBI had become involved due to the interstate nature of the crimes, and they had a plan that would culminate on my graduation day. May 15th arrived with all the pomp and circumstance befitting a college graduation. The sun shone brilliantly over the campus quad where rows of chairs were arranged for the ceremony. I sat among my fellow graduates, the black gown hiding the nervous trembling of my hands. My eyes scanned the audience repeatedly, looking for familiar faces, both welcome and unwelcome. Jessica caught my eye from several rows ahead and gave me a thumbs up. She was one of the few people who knew what might unfold today. Professor Winters nodded approvingly as she passed by my row, unaware of the drama about to intersect with her carefully planned academic ceremony. And then I saw her. My mother, seated toward the back of the guest section, wearing a floral dress I didn't recognize and oversized sunglasses that failed to disguise her identity. My breath caught in my throat. She had come. After months of running, of hiding, she had returned for me, for my graduation. The irony was almost too much to bear. After everything she had done to jeopardize this very achievement, she still wanted to witness it. Still wanted to pretend she was the proud mother supporting her successful daughter. The audacity was breathtaking. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that two plainclothes FBI agents were seated directly behind her. Detective Rivera stood at the perimeter of the seating area, her eyes never leaving my mother's form. The trap was set. As the university president began his address about bright futures and limitless potential, I tried to focus on his words rather than the impending confrontation. This was still my graduation, still the culmination of years of hard work and determination. I wouldn't let my mother's crimes overshadow this achievement too. One by one, graduates were called to the stage. When Sarah Mitchell, summa cum laude, echoed through the speakers, I rose on unsteady legs and made my way forward. As I accepted my diploma, a sense of fierce pride pushed through the anxiety. I had done this. Despite everything, I had reached this milestone. I turned to face the audience, diploma in hand, and locked eyes with my mother. Even from a distance, I could see her rise slightly from her seat, her hands coming together in applause. For one suspended moment, we were simply mother and daughter again, sharing a triumph. And then the moment shattered as the FBI agents moved in. The chaos erupted so quickly that most people in the audience didn't immediately understand what was happening. One moment, there was polite applause as I stood on stage clutching my diploma. The next, there were raised voices and the flash of badges as the FBI agents converged on my mother. Her sunglasses fell to the ground as they took her by the arms, revealing eyes wide with shock and betrayal, as if she were the one who had been wronged. "What is this?" she demanded loudly, her voice carrying across the suddenly hushed ceremony. Sarah, tell them there's been a mistake." I remained frozen on stage, my diploma clutched so tightly my knuckles had turned white. This was the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated for months, yet nothing could have prepared me for the reality of watching my mother being handcuffed at my graduation ceremony. The university president, to his credit, recovered quickly. "Let's continue with our ceremony," he announced, gently guiding me off stage as security personnel moved to assist the FBI agents. A murmur ran through the crowd. Confusion, speculation, the rapid-fire clicking of smartphone cameras capturing a moment that would undoubtedly trend on campus social media within minutes. As I returned to my seat, Jessica reached across the aisle to squeeze my hand. "You okay?" she mouthed. I nodded automatically, though. Okay. Couldn't have been further from the truth. I felt hollowed out, as if something vital had been scooped from my chest. The logical part of my brain knew this was necessary, justice being served, but my heart ached with a child's simple grief. That's my mom. The rest of the graduation ceremony passed in a blur. Names were called, diplomas distributed, caps eventually tossed into the air amidst cheers and celebration. I went through the motions mechanically, my mind elsewhere, in a police car, at the local FBI field office, wherever they had taken my mother. "Ms. Mitchell?" A woman in a dark suit approached as graduates and families began dispersing across the lawn. She flashed her credentials briefly. "Agent Cassidy, FBI. If you have a moment." She led me to a quiet area away from the crowd, where Detective Rivera was waiting. The detective's expression was a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal concern. "It went smoothly," Agent Cassidy said, answering my unasked question. "She's being processed now. The charges include bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and crossing state lines to avoid prosecution. Will I need to be there?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "For the arraignment, I mean." "Not today," Detective Rivera replied. "But eventually, yes. Your testimony will be crucial. She's looking at significant federal charges, Sarah. This isn't going to disappear with a slap on the wrist." I nodded, trying to process what that meant. My mother, who had never even had a parking ticket in her life, at least not in her own name, I thought bitterly, was now facing federal prison time. Because of me. Because I had chosen to pursue justice rather than sweep her crimes under the rug. "Can I see her?" The question surprised even me as it left my lips. Agent Cassidy and Detective Rivera exchanged glances. "That might not be advisable right now," Agent Cassidy began cautiously. "I need to," I insisted. "I need her to explain, to tell me why. I've been living with this betrayal for months without answers. Please." Perhaps it was the graduation gown I still wore, or the rawness in my voice, but something made them relent. "We can arrange a brief meeting," Detective Rivera conceded, "but you should be prepared. People facing these kinds of charges rarely respond with complete honesty or accountability." 2 hours later, I sat in a sterile interview room at the FBI field office, my graduation cap and gown replaced by the jeans and blouse I'd worn under them. My diploma was safely tucked in Jessica's car. She had offered to wait outside for as long as necessary. When they brought my mother in, I barely recognized her. Gone was the confident, always put-together woman who had raised me. In her place was someone smaller somehow, her makeup smudged, her perfectly maintained hair disheveled. The orange jumpsuit seemed to swallow her frame. But it was her eyes that shocked me most, cold and hard, with none of the warmth I associated with my mother. "Why did you come back?" I asked, as soon as the door closed behind the guard. "No hello? No how are you?" Just the question that had been burning in my mind since I spotted her in the audience. She sat across from me, hands cuffed in front of her on the metal table. "It was your graduation," she replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I wouldn't have missed it. The absurdity of her statement struck me like a physical blow. You wouldn't miss my graduation, but you had no problem stealing my identity? Racking up thousands in debt under my name? Potentially ruining my entire future. "I was going to pay it all back," she said, her voice taking on the defensive tone I remembered from childhood arguments. "You were never supposed to find out. I had a system." "A system," I repeated flatly. "Mom, you maxed out 6 credit cards. You took out personal loans. You tried to buy property in my name. That's not a system. That's a crime spree." She leaned forward, her expression suddenly earnest. "You don't understand, Sarah. After your father left, I had nothing. No safety net, no family support. Just endless bills and a child to raise alone. Do you know how hard I worked to give you a good life? The sacrifices I made? So this was what? Payback? I owed you a luxury lifestyle because you did the basic job of parenting? The anger I had suppressed for months finally bubbled to the surface. No, of course not, she backpedaled quickly. But when I opened that first card, it was just for emergencies, Sarah, just to have a backup plan. And then, she trailed off, her gaze drifting to some middle distance. And then you got used to the lifestyle. I finished for her. The nice clothes, the vacations, the feeling of finally having what you thought you deserved. Her eyes snapped back to mine, a flash of recognition and shame, crossing her face before the defensive mask slipped back into place. You sound just like your father now. Always so superior, so judgmental. I refused to take the bait, to be drawn into old family dynamics. What I don't understand is why you came back today. You had to know it was risky. The investigators were looking for you. For the first time since she entered the room, my mother's expression softened into something recognizable. Because I'm proud of you, Sarah. Despite everything, I wanted to see you walk across that stage. To see you achieve what I never could. The sincerity in her voice cut deeper than her anger had. This complicated woman who had committed calculated fraud against her own daughter still maintained some twisted form of maternal pride. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Was any of it real? I asked, my voice dropping to nearly a whisper. All those years, all those moments when you seemed to care about me, about my future, was that just part of your plan too? Tears welled in her eyes, the first genuine emotion I'd seen since she entered the room. Of course it was real. You're my daughter, I love you, that never changed. She reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I pulled back instinctively. People who love you don't sabotage your future, I said, rising from my chair. They don't exploit your trust. They don't steal your identity and then expect you to understand. Sarah, please, she began, desperation creeping into her voice. I can fix this. If you just tell them it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding. I cut her off. It was fraud. And I'm not going to lie to protect you from the consequences of your actions. Not anymore. As I turned to leave, she called after me. I did everything for you. Everything. Who do you think paid for all those extracurricular activities? Those college application fees? You wouldn't even have that diploma if it weren't for me. I paused at the door, turning back one last time. No, Mom. I have this diploma despite you. Despite the fact that you were actively undermining my future while pretending to support it. And now I need to figure out how to rebuild my life, without you. The door closed behind me with a definitive click, sealing off her protests. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. Detective Rivera approached cautiously. How did it go? She asked, though her expression suggested she had a good idea. About as well as you'd expect, I replied. She's still convinced she's the victim in all this. Detective Rivera nodded sympathetically. That's common with these cases. Perpetrators often develop elaborate justifications for their actions, especially when family is involved. It makes it easier to live with themselves. What happens now? I asked, pushing myself away from the wall. Now she goes through the system. Arraignment. Bail hearing. Though given the flight risk, bail is unlikely. Then eventually trial unless she takes a plea deal. She hesitated before adding, You should prepare yourself. This could be a lengthy process, and you'll be central to it. The weight of that reality settled over me as I left the building. Jessica was waiting in her car as promised, her face lighting up with concern when she saw my expression. That bad? She asked as I slid into the passenger seat. Worse, I admitted. She still doesn't really think she did anything wrong. Or at least, nothing that wasn't justified. Jessica pulled away from the curb, heading back toward our apartment. So what's your plan now? I mean, besides the obvious legal stuff, it was a good question. One I hadn't had much time to consider with everything else happening. I need to rebuild my credit. Get that job offer from Grant Thornton secured before they change their mind. Find a place to live after graduation that I can actually afford with my credit in shambles. The tasks seemed overwhelming when listed one after another. You know you can stay with me as long as you need. Jessica offered immediately. My parents already said they'd love to have you for the summer if you want to come home with me. Her kindness brought unexpected tears to my eyes. While my own mother had been systematically destroying my financial future, here was Jessica and her family offering support without hesitation. "Thank you," I managed. "I might take you up on that?" The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of post-graduation activity overlaid with the ongoing legal proceedings. My mother was indeed denied bail, considered a flight risk given her previous disappearance. The prosecutor assigned to the case was building what she called an airtight case, with the evidence collected from credit card companies, banks, and my own detailed documentation. Meanwhile, I found myself in the surreal position of explaining to potential employers why my credit report looked like that of a fraudulent spender while I interviewed for positions that would require impeccable financial integrity. "We've reviewed your situation," Mr. Harrington from Grant Thornton said during our follow-up interview. And while normally credit issues would be a red flag for a position in forensic accounting, I held my breath, preparing for the gentle letdown I'd already received from 2 other firms. "We believe your personal experience actually gives you unique insight that would be valuable to our team." He slid a folder across the desk. "This is our official offer. We'd like you to start after you've had some time to deal with your personal situation." I stared at the folder in disbelief. "You're still offering me the position? Even knowing everything that's happening?" Mr. Harrington nodded. "Ms. Mitchell, you discovered fraud committed against you, reported it despite personal connections, and are seeing the case through properly. That shows exactly the kind of integrity and commitment to financial justice we look for. In fact, with your permission, we'd like to develop your case into a training module for our new hires." For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. One door might have closed with my mother's betrayal and arrest, but others were opening, opportunities I hadn't even considered. As summer progressed, so did the case against Diane Mitchell. Her court-appointed attorney pushed for a plea deal, hoping to reduce the potential sentence. The prosecutor kept me informed of every development, always careful to explain the implications. "They're offering a deal," she told me during one of our regular calls. 5 years instead of the potential 15, with restitution requirements once she's released. They want to know if you have any objections. Did I? Part of me still struggled with the idea of sending my mother to prison at all, despite the clear evidence of her crimes. But another part, the part that had grown stronger through this ordeal, recognized that consequences were necessary, not just for justice, but for my mother's own growth. "I don't object to the deal," I said finally, "but I want the restitution terms to be strict. Not because I expect to ever see that money, but because I want her to understand the gravity of what she did." The prosecutor seemed to approve of my reasoning. "I'll make sure of it. And Sarah? You're handling this with remarkable maturity. Many victims in your position would be demanding maximum penalties or refusing to engage with the process altogether. I'm not interested in revenge," I told her honestly. "I just want to move forward." Moving forward meant practical steps as well as emotional ones. With Jessica's help, I began the painstaking process of clearing my credit report, disputing fraudulent accounts, and establishing new, legitimate credit in my name. It was tedious, frustrating work, but each resolved account felt like reclaiming a piece of my identity. It also meant therapy, weekly sessions with Dr. Patel, where I could safely process the complicated grief of losing my relationship with my mother while she was still very much alive. "You're mourning multiple losses," Dr. Patel observed during one session. "The loss of the mother you thought you had, the loss of financial security, the loss of trust. It's natural to feel overwhelmed. The hardest part is that I still love her," I admitted. "Despite everything, there's still this part of me that remembers the good times, that wants to believe she really did care about me in her own way. Those feelings can coexist," Dr. Patel assured me. "You can love your mother and be angry at her actions. You can miss the relationship you had while acknowledging it was built partly on deception. Humans are complex, our emotions even more so." By August, I had secured an apartment I could afford on my new salary, established a secured credit card to begin rebuilding my credit score, and prepared for my first day at Grant Thornton. My mother had accepted the plea deal and was serving her sentence at a minimum security federal prison in Kentucky. Are you going to visit her? Jessica asked as she helped me arrange furniture in my new living room. I placed a framed photo on the bookshelf, me at graduation, surrounded by Jessica and her parents who had cheered me on after my mother's arrest. Eventually, I replied. Not yet. I'm not ready. That's fair, she said, stepping back to admire our handiwork. You know what's amazing, though? 6 months ago, your whole world imploded. Now look at you. New job, new apartment, new start. You're like the poster child for resilience. I laughed, but her words resonated. From the ashes of my mother's betrayal, I had indeed built something new. A life founded on truth rather than deception, on earned achievement rather than stolen opportunities. 2 weeks later, I received my first letter from prison. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope and set it aside, not yet ready to read whatever justifications or explanations it might contain. Instead, I focused on preparing for my first major case at work, helping a family-owned business that suspected their trusted bookkeeper of embezzlement. Why did you request this case specifically? My supervisor asked when I volunteered. It's pretty straightforward compared to some of the others on our docket. I thought about the family who owned the business, their sense of betrayal, their shattered trust, their confusion about how someone they treated like family could steal from them so systematically. Because I understand exactly what they're going through, I replied, and I want to help them find not just answers, but a path forward. As I gathered my notes and prepared to meet with the clients, I glanced at my mother's unopened letter still sitting on my desk. Someday, I would read it. Someday, I might even find it in myself to forgive her. But today, I had other people to help. People who needed the unique perspective that only someone who had walked through fire could provide. My mother had stolen my identity, but in the process of reclaiming it, I had discovered something powerful. A purpose born from pain, a strength forged in betrayal, and the knowledge that even the worst moments of our lives can become the foundation for something meaningful. That wasn't just resilience, it was transformation. 6 months into my position at Grant Thornton, I found myself standing in front of a conference room filled with new recruits. The PowerPoint slide behind me displayed a redacted version of my credit report, a visual testament to the financial carnage my mother had created. Identity theft is not just numbers on a page, I told the room of attentive faces. It's a violation that goes beyond financial damage. When the perpetrator is someone you love, someone you trust implicitly, that violation cuts even deeper. A young man in the front row raised his hand. How did you even begin to recover from something like that? Both professionally and personally. His question echoed what so many had asked me over the past year. The journey from victim to survivor to advocate had been anything but linear. One step at a time, I replied honestly, and by turning what happened to me into a mission to help others. What I didn't mention was that my mother's letter, now joined by 14 others, remained unopened in a box in my closet. Each month, her familiar handwriting would appear in my mailbox, and each month, I would add it to the collection, not yet ready to confront whatever justifications or pleas they might contain. After the training session, my supervisor Catherine caught up with me in the hallway. That was powerful, Sarah. The trainees were completely engaged. You could have heard a pin drop in there. Thanks, I said, gathering my notes. It gets a little easier each time I tell it. That's why I wanted to discuss something with you, Catherine continued, guiding me toward her office. Take a seat. Once we were settled, she slid a folder across her desk. We've been approached by the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. They're putting together a special task force focused specifically on familiar fraud, identity theft committed by family members. They need consultants who understand both the financial and emotional complexities involved. I felt my pulse quicken. And you thought of me, Catherine nodded. You've become our in-house expert on this type of fraud, Sarah. Your case studies are being used in training sessions across all our offices. This would be a natural extension of that work, helping law enforcement better understand and prosecute these crimes while supporting victims. Would I need to leave Grant Thornton? I asked, already mentally calculating the implications. Not at all. This would be a consulting position, maybe 10 hours a week. The firm fully supports it and would adjust your other responsibilities accordingly. She leaned forward. Think about it, Sarah. You could help shape how these cases are handled on a national level. That evening, I called Jessica to share the news. Our weekly catch-up calls had remained a constant even though she had moved to Boston for her own career. That's incredible, she exclaimed after I explained the opportunity. Are you going to take it? I gazed out my apartment window at the city lights. I think I am. It feels like the right next step. You know what this means, right? Jessica's voice took on that knowing tone I recognized from our college days. You're going to have to deal with those letters soon. My stomach tightened. Jessica was the only person who knew about my mother's unopened correspondence. What do the letters have to do with the FBI position? Sarah, she said gently, you're about to become the face of familiar fraud recovery. You'll be counseling victims, helping shape prosecution strategies. Don't you think you should resolve your own situation first? As much as I wanted to dismiss her concern, I knew she was right. The unopened letters had become a symbol of my unresolved feelings, a physical manifestation of the emotional wall I'd built between myself and my mother. I'll think about it, I promised, which was more than I had been willing to concede in months. The next morning, I accepted the FBI consulting position. Agent Cassidy, who had been at my graduation during my mother's arrest, would be my primary contact. We arranged to meet the following week to discuss the parameters of my involvement. We're particularly interested in developing better support systems for victims, she explained over coffee. The financial aspects of these crimes are well documented, but the emotional and psychological impacts are often overlooked in prosecution. That's where most victims get stuck, I agreed. The practical steps to recover your credit are tedious but straightforward. Recovering your sense of trust, that's the real challenge. Agent Cassidy studied me for a moment. Have you had any contact with your mother since the sentencing? The question caught me off guard, though I should have expected it. She writes to me. I haven't responded. That's completely understandable, she assured me quickly. There's no right way to handle this kind of betrayal. I just wondered if your experience with rebuilding, or choosing not to rebuild, that relationship might inform our victim support protocols. Her words stayed with me for days afterward. Was I limiting my ability to help others by avoiding my own unresolved issues? The box of letters seemed to grow heavier in my closet, its presence more insistent. That weekend, I finally sat down on my living room floor and opened the box. 16 letters now, arranged chronologically. With trembling hands, I opened the first one, dated just 2 weeks after my mother began her sentence. Dear Sarah, it began in her familiar looping handwriting. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know that I've finally stopped lying. To you, to myself, to everyone. I read through each letter, one after another, as afternoon faded into evening. Unlike our confrontation at the FBI office, these pages contain no justifications, no attempts to minimize what she had done. Instead, they chronicled my mother's painful journey toward accountability, her participation in therapy, her work with financial literacy programs for other inmates, her gradual understanding of the damage she had caused. The most recent letter, received just days earlier, contained a paragraph that made my breath catch. The prison psychologist asked me recently what I would say to you if you were sitting across from me right now. I told her I wouldn't say anything at first. I would just listen, really listen, to what you needed to tell me. Something I should have done years ago instead of thinking I always knew what was best. I stole more than your financial identity, Sarah. I stole your agency, your security, your trust. No sentence will ever be long enough to make that right. I set the letter down, tears blurring my vision. For the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first crack in the wall I'd built. The next morning, I made a decision. I would visit my mother. The minimum security federal prison in Kentucky was nothing like the imposing fortress I had imagined. The visiting area resembled a sparse cafeteria, tables bolted to the floor, vending machines along one wall, a small play area for children visiting incarcerated parents. I spotted her immediately. My mother sat ramrod straight at a table near the center of the room, her once perfect hair now entirely gray, pulled back in a simple ponytail. The orange jumpsuit had been replaced with a khaki one, but she looked no less out of place in it. When she saw me, her composure cracked for just a moment, her hand flying to her mouth in surprise. "Sarah?" she whispered as I sat across from her. You came. I read your letters, I said simply, watching her face carefully. All of them. She nodded, blinking rapidly. I wasn't sure you would. I wouldn't have blamed you if you burned them without opening them. I considered it, I admitted, for a long time. A painful silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we had never said to each other. Finally, my mother folded her hands on the table. The therapist here has been helping me understand what I did. Not just the fraud, but the deeper betrayal. She says it's called financial enmeshment, when a parent uses a child as an extension of their own financial identity. She spoke carefully, as if reciting something she had rehearsed. But that clinical term doesn't begin to capture what I did to you. No, I agreed quietly. It doesn't. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she continued. I just want you to know that I'm finally seeing clearly who I was, what I did, the damage I caused. And I'm trying to change, for whatever that's worth. I studied the woman across from me, searching for signs of the mother I had known, the one who had braided my hair for school pictures, who had worked double shifts to buy my prom dress, who had somehow balanced genuine love with systematic betrayal. Why did you really come to my graduation? I asked suddenly. You had to know it was risky. A sad smile crossed her face. Because I was proud of you. Because watching you succeed was the one genuinely good thing in my life. And because some part of me knew it was time to stop running. She hesitated before adding, maybe some part of me even wanted to be caught. Do you regret what you did, or just that you got caught? The question had burned in me for over a year. Both, she answered without hesitation. At first, just getting caught. Now, everything. Every card I opened, every lie I told, every time I looked you in the eye knowing what I was doing to your future. Her voice broke. Especially that. For the first time, I believed her. The remorse seemed to radiate from her, genuine and raw in a way her previous explanations had never been. I'm working with the FBI now, I told her, watching surprise register on her face. Consulting on cases like ours, familiar fraud they call it, helping them understand how to better support victims. Pride flickered across her features before she carefully schooled her expression. You always did have a way of turning challenges into stepping stones. That's all you're doing, not mine. Not entirely, I said, surprising myself with the admission. You did teach me resilience, Mom. Determination. How to pick myself up and keep going. The irony is that I needed all of those qualities to recover from what you did. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. But you did, I replied simply. And that's something we both have to live with. Our visit ended shortly after, neither of us quite knowing how to bridge the vast gap between us. As I signed out at the visitor's desk, the guard mentioned that my mother had been selected for a prison work program, teaching financial literacy to other inmates. She's quite good at it, he noted. Gets through to people when the regular instructors can't. Driving back to the airport, I turned that information over in my mind. Was it possible that my mother's skills, the same charisma and financial instincts she had once used destructively, could actually help others? Could something positive emerge from all this damage? The thought stayed with me as I threw myself into my new consulting role with the FBI. Over the next few months, I helped develop training materials for agents, created resource guides for victims, and occasionally spoke directly with those struggling to rebuild after betrayal by family members. The hardest part is that no one understands, a young man told me during one support session. His father had opened multiple credit accounts in his name while he was serving in the military overseas. Everyone says to just cut ties and move on, like it's that simple. It's never simple, I agreed. These aren't just random criminals. These are people we love, people who shaped our lives in both positive and negative ways. The relationship doesn't just disappear because of what they did. Exactly, he exclaimed, relief evident in his voice. So how do you deal with that? The mixed feelings? I thought about my mother, about our tentative correspondence since my visit. We were far from reconciled, but we were cautiously rebuilding something, not the blind trust of before, but a more honest relationship grounded in difficult truths. You create boundaries that protect you, I told him. You acknowledge both the harm they caused and the love that still exists. And you decide, based on their actions now, not their promises, whether they deserve a place in your life going forward. As the one-year anniversary of my mother's sentencing approached, Agent Cassidy came to me with an unexpected proposal. "We're developing a pilot program," she explained, spreading materials across my desk, "bringing together perpetrators and victims of familiar fraud, not their own family members, but others in similar situations, for restorative justice dialogue." I raised an eyebrow. "You want former identity thieves to counsel victims?" "Not exactly," she clarified. "We want to create a space where victims can ask questions that only perpetrators can answer. The why and how could you? Questions that haunt so many victims, and where reformed perpetrators can contribute meaningfully to healing the kind of damage they once caused." My mind immediately went to my mother and her prison financial literacy program. "And you want my input on this?" "More than your input," Agent Cassidy replied. "We'd like you to help design and oversee the program. Your perspective as both a victim and a professional in this field is uniquely valuable." I took the weekend to consider the proposal, discussing it with both Jessica and Dr. Patel, who had remained an occasional sounding board. "It's an interesting concept," Dr. Patel observed during our phone consultation. "There's solid evidence for the effectiveness of restorative justice approaches, particularly with crimes that breach trust." "I'm just not sure I'm the right person," I admitted. "I'm still working through my own situation." "Perhaps that's precisely why you are the right person," she suggested. "You understand the complexity in a way someone with a purely academic or professional interest wouldn't." After much deliberation, I agreed to help develop the program on one condition. I wanted to visit several of the potential inmate participants myself, including my mother. If I was going to vouch for the sincerity of their rehabilitation, I needed to assess it firsthand. 2 weeks later, I found myself once again in the Kentucky prison, but this time in a conference room rather than the visiting area. My mother entered with 3 other women, all serving sentences for financial crimes against family members. The purpose of my visit had been explained to them, but I could see the surprise in my mother's eyes at finding me there. "Ladies, this is Sarah Mitchell," the program coordinator introduced me. "She's consulting with the FBI on a new restorative justice initiative that some of you might eventually participate in. She's here to understand your perspective on familiar fraud and your journey toward rehabilitation." For the next 2 hours, I listened as these women shared their stories, the rationalizations they had once clung to, the moment reality had finally broken through, the painful work of acknowledging the harm they had caused to those who trusted them most. My mother spoke last, her voice steady despite the occasional tremor in her hands. "The hardest part isn't the sentence," she told the group. "It's knowing that you've broken something that may never be fully repaired." My daughter's trust, her eyes flickered to me briefly, was the most precious thing I had, and I shattered it for temporary financial gain that wasn't even worth it in the end. "What would you say to other parents considering similar actions?" I asked, maintaining my professional demeanor despite the personal nature of her response. "That the moment of reckoning will come," she replied without hesitation. "And when it does, no luxury purchase or status symbol will be worth seeing the betrayal in your child's eyes. Nothing is worth that." The raw honesty in her voice affected me more than I expected. This wasn't the defensive woman from the FBI interview room, or even the cautiously remorseful figure from our first prison visit. This was someone who had finally faced herself without excuses. As the session concluded and the other women were escorted out, my mother lingered, clearly hoping for a moment alone. The program coordinator looked to me questioningly, and I nodded my permission. Once we were alone, my mother spoke quietly. "I didn't know you were involved with this program." "It's recent," I explained. "Still in development." She nodded, then asked the question I could see burning in her eyes. "Was any of this real? Or just part of your evaluation?" "Both," I admitted. "I needed to see for myself if people in your position could genuinely change, if this program has any chance of helping victims." "And your verdict?" A vulnerability I rarely saw in her crossed her face. I considered my response carefully. "I think change is possible. Not easy, not guaranteed, but possible. I've seen it today." Relief softened her features. "Sarah, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but..." I'm not ready to fully reconcile, I interrupted gently. Maybe I never will be. But I am ready to acknowledge that you're doing the work, that you're trying to make amends in whatever way you can. That's more than I deserve, she whispered. Maybe, I conceded. But it's what we both need to move forward. Driving away from the prison that day, I felt a weight lift, not the entire burden of the past, but enough to breathe more freely than I had in nearly 2 years. My mother had committed unforgivable acts, had betrayed me in ways that had fundamentally changed the course of my life. Those facts would never change. But what I was finally beginning to understand was that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about creating space for a different future, one where the pain didn't define every interaction, where growth was possible for both the person who caused harm and the one who had been harmed. A week later, I presented my findings to Agent Cassidy and the program development team. I believe this approach has merit, I concluded after outlining my observations. With proper screening of participants, clear boundaries, and ongoing support for victims, it could provide answers and closure that the traditional justice system alone cannot offer. And you're willing to continue helping us develop and implement it? Agent Cassidy confirmed. I thought about the victims I had counseled, about their haunting questions that no one but a reformed perpetrator could truly answer. I thought about my mother, using her time in prison to finally face her demons and help others do the same. And I thought about my own journey, from devastated victim to reluctant prosecutor to emerging advocate. Yes, I said firmly, I am. As I walked out of the FBI offices that afternoon, my phone chimed with a notification. My credit score had officially crossed back into the good range, a milestone in my financial recovery that had once seemed impossibly distant. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. Proof that restoration was possible, even after the most devastating breaches of trust. I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, feeling possibility unfurl within me. My mother's crimes had altered the trajectory of my life, but not in the way either of us could have anticipated. From those broken pieces had emerged a purpose I might never have discovered otherwise, a strength I hadn't known I possessed, and a nuanced understanding of human frailty and resilience that no textbook could have taught me. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, but for the first time in a long time, I was truly ready to walk it, step by step, day by day, rebuilding not just my credit, but my capacity to create meaning from even the deepest wounds life could inflict. 3 years to the day after discovering my mother's betrayal, I stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., facing a room filled with lawmakers, law enforcement officials, and victims, advocates. The culmination of our work, the Family Financial Reconciliation Act, was about to be introduced to Congress, and I had been asked to share the journey that had inspired it. When my credit report first revealed my mother's deception, I began, my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves. I thought I had lost everything, my financial security, my professional future, and most painfully, my relationship with the one person who was supposed to protect me from harm rather than cause it. Faces in the audience nodded in understanding, some with the haunted look I had come to recognize in fellow victims of familiar fraud. What I couldn't see then was that this betrayal, while devastating, would not define the rest of my life, unless I allowed it to. Today I stand before you not just as a survivor, but as someone who has found purpose in that pain. In the front row, Agent Cassidy smiled encouragingly. Beside her sat Jessica, who had flown in from Boston to support me on this milestone day. And in the back of the room, almost hidden in the shadows, was my mother, released 3 months earlier after serving just over half of her sentence due to exemplary behavior and her work with other inmates. Our relationship remained complicated, a delicate balance of cautious connection and necessary boundaries. But her presence today represented how far we had both come, her in taking full responsibility for her actions, me in finding the strength to acknowledge her efforts without compromising my own healing. The legislation being introduced today addresses the unique devastation of familiar fraud, I continued. It provides enhanced resources for victims, specialized training for law enforcement, mandatory financial literacy education for offenders, and perhaps most importantly, establishes the nation's first restorative justice program, specifically designed for financial crimes committed by family members. I glanced down at my notes, then set them aside. The rest of this speech needed to come from the heart. What makes familiar fraud so destructive isn't just the financial damage. It's the breach of our most fundamental human need: trust. When someone we love betrays us financially, they don't just steal our resources. They steal our sense of safety in the world, our ability to believe in the goodness of others, our willingness to be vulnerable again. The room had grown completely silent, the weight of collective experience hanging in the air. I know this because I lived it. I know this because I've counseled hundreds of others who have lived it too. And I know that our current legal system, while necessary, addresses only the financial and legal aspects of these crimes, not the profound emotional and relational damage that lingers long after sentencing. My gaze found my mother in the back of the room. Our eyes met briefly, an unspoken communication passing between us, acknowledgement of both the harm done and the healing attempted. This legislation represents a more holistic approach. It recognizes that complete recovery requires both justice and the opportunity for genuine accountability. It creates pathways for offenders to understand the full impact of their actions and make meaningful amends beyond financial restitution. And most crucially, it provides victims with the support they need to rebuild not just their credit scores, but their capacity to trust again, at whatever level feels safe for them. As I concluded my remarks, and the proposed legislation was formally introduced, a sense of completion washed over me. The traumatic discovery that had once threatened to derail my life had instead set me on a path I could never have imagined, one that had allowed me to help shape national policy and support countless others facing similar betrayals. After the formal proceedings, Jessica made her way to my side, wrapping me in a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "You were absolutely brilliant up there." "I couldn't have done any of this without you," I told her honestly. "You were there from day one, when my world was falling apart." "That's what friends do," she replied simply. "And speaking of support systems, are you going to talk to her?" She nodded discreetly toward my mother, who stood awkwardly at the edge of the reception, clearly uncertain of her place in this celebration. "Yes," I said after a moment's hesitation. "I think I am." As I made my way across the room, several people stopped me to share their own stories of financial betrayal or to thank me for my advocacy. By the time I reached my mother, she had been joined by Agent Cassidy, their conversation appearing surprisingly comfortable given their history. "There she is," Agent Cassidy said warmly as I approached. "The woman of the hour, /quote. My mother's eyes shone with unmistakable pride, though she tempered her expression, still careful not to presume too much. "That was a powerful speech, Sarah. You've accomplished something extraordinary here." "We all did," I acknowledged, including both of them in my response. "This legislation wouldn't exist without the insights from the pilot program, including yours," I added, meeting my mother's gaze directly. After her release, my mother had continued her involvement with the Restorative Justice Initiative, first as a participant and eventually as a peer counselor for other offenders working toward accountability. Her first-hand experience of both perpetrating familiar fraud and rebuilding a fractured relationship with her victim, me, had proven invaluable in developing effective protocols. "I just followed your lead," she replied softly. "You were the one brave enough to create something constructive out of what I destroyed." The raw honesty between us no longer carried the sharp edge of pain it once had. Time had not erased the past, but it had provided perspective and the space to build something new from the rubble of what was lost. "I'm heading back to New York tomorrow," I said, changing the subject. "But I was thinking maybe we could have dinner tonight. There's a new restaurant near my hotel that's supposed to be good." The invitation, the first I had extended since her release, visibly moved her. "I'd like that very much," she replied, composure slipping just slightly. Later that evening, seated across from my mother at a quiet table tucked into the corner of an elegant restaurant, I found myself reflecting on the long, painful journey that had brought us to this moment. The candle between us cast flickering shadows across her face, highlighting the new lines etched by time and hardship. "I never thought we'd be here," she admitted, echoing my thoughts. "After what I did, I expected, deserved, to lose you forever." "For a long time, I thought that too," I acknowledged, taking a sip of water. "I couldn't imagine ever wanting you in my life again." "What changed?" she asked, her question tentative, as if afraid to examine this fragile new reality too closely. I considered my answer carefully. I realized that holding on to anger was keeping me locked in the past. That forgiving you, not for your sake, but for mine, was the only way I could fully move forward. Forgiveness, she repeated softly. Even after everything, that seems like more than I deserve. Forgiveness isn't about deserving, I said, surprising myself with the certainty I felt. It's about choosing not to let the hurt define everything that comes after. It's about reclaiming your own power. My mother nodded slowly, absorbing my words. The therapist in prison used to say something similar. That forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not the other person. She hesitated before adding, "But I am grateful for it, Sarah, more than I can express." It doesn't mean forgetting, I clarified, and it doesn't mean we go back to the way things were. That relationship is gone. But maybe we can build something different. Something based on truth this time. I'd like that, she said simply. Whatever form it takes, however much or little you want me in your life, I'm just thankful for the chance. As our dinner progressed, conversation flowed more easily than either of us might have expected. We carefully navigated around the most painful parts of our shared history, focusing instead on the present. My work with the FBI, her plans to use her remaining years to educate others about the devastating impact of financial crimes against family members. I've been offered a position with a nonprofit that works with former inmates reintegrating into society, she told me as we shared a dessert. Specifically those convicted of financial crimes. They want me to develop a curriculum around accountability and making amends. That sounds perfect for you, I said sincerely. You always were a good teacher. A shadow crossed her face. I just wish I had used that ability for better purposes earlier in life. The things I could have taught you, if I hadn't been so focused on appearances and material things. You did teach me, I reminded her. Just not in the way either of us would have chosen. Your mistakes shaped me too. My resilience, my empathy for others in similar situations, my career path. I wouldn't wish what happened on anyone, but I can acknowledge that growth came from it. She reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine, still respecting the boundaries I had established. You are remarkable, Sarah. So much stronger than I ever was. /quote, not stronger, I corrected gently, just different. I had advantages you didn't. Education, support systems, professional resources. And I had the benefit of watching the consequences of your choices unfold. That's a powerful deterrent. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, an unexpected thought occurred to me. Would you like to see where I live now? My apartment in New York? Not tonight, obviously, but sometime, when you're ready. The invitation represented a significant shift in our carefully reconstructed relationship, opening my personal space to her after years of maintained distance. Emotion welled in her eyes. I would be honored, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Whenever you feel comfortable with that. Back in my hotel room that night, I found myself unable to sleep, the day's events replaying in my mind. From the legislative introduction to the dinner with my mother, it felt as though a significant chapter was closing, not ending exactly, but transitioning into something new. I opened my laptop and navigated to my online banking portal, checking my credit score out of habit. The number that had once plummeted to devastating lows now stood solidly in the excellent range, a numerical testament to years of diligent financial rehabilitation. But it was just a number, I realized. The true measure of my recovery lay elsewhere. It was in the work I'd done helping others navigate similar betrayals, in the legislation that would protect future victims, in my ability to sit across from the person who had hurt me most deeply and see her not as a monster, but as a flawed human capable of both terrible mistakes and genuine remorse. The next morning, as I prepared to board my flight back to New York, my phone chimed with a message from Agent Cassidy. Video of your speech going viral online. You've struck a chord, already getting calls from victims, advocacy groups wanting to know how they can support the legislation. I smiled, remembering how alone I had felt in those early days after discovering my mother's fraud, as if no one could possibly understand the unique pain of being betrayed by family. Now thousands were finding validation and hope in my story, just as I had eventually found purpose in my pain. The flight attendant announced boarding, and I gathered my belongings, mentally shifting focus to the week ahead. The restorative justice program was expanding to 3 new states, and I was scheduled to train facilitators in Chicago on Monday. My book manuscript, Broken Trust: Surviving Betrayal and Rebuilding Your Life, was due to my editor by the end of the month. And somewhere in between, I needed to prepare for my mother's first visit to my apartment, a step I was finally ready to take. 6 months later, I stood in that same apartment, making final preparations for a small gathering. The advance copies of my book had arrived that morning, and Jessica had insisted on hosting a celebration dinner. My mother would be there, the first time she would meet my friends and colleagues in this new context. As I arranged glasses on the dining table, my gaze fell on the framed photo that now held a place of honor on my bookshelf. It wasn't the graduation picture, though that remained important too, but a more recent image. My mother and I stood side by side at the governor's signing ceremony for our state's version of the Family Financial Reconciliation Act, neither of us touching but standing close enough to signal connection. It captured perfectly the delicate balance we had achieved, not the unconditional closeness of before, but a mindful relationship built on hard-earned truth. The doorbell rang, and I took a deep breath before answering. Jessica stood there with a bottle of champagne and an enormous bouquet of flowers. "Ready for this?" she asked, understanding, as always, the complexity of the evening ahead. "As I'll ever be," I replied with a smile. One by one, the other guests arrived. Agent Cassidy and her husband, Dr. Patel, whose therapeutic guidance had been instrumental in my healing journey, colleagues from the FBI's Victim Advocacy Division, my editor, and finally my mother, arriving precisely on time with a small, carefully wrapped package. "For you," she said, handing it to me after I welcomed her in. A small congratulations gift. Inside the box was a journal, bound in soft leather with my initials embossed on the cover. "Open it," she encouraged. The first page contained a handwritten note. "For your next chapter, whatever you choose it to be, with boundless admiration for the woman you've become, not despite the challenges, but because of how you faced them. Love, Mom." /quote. Simple words, but they acknowledged everything. The harm done, the strength found, the future still unfolding. I met her eyes and saw in them not the desperate justification of before, nor the crushing guilt of early recovery, but a calm acceptance of our complicated truth. "Thank you," I said simply. "It's perfect." As dinner progressed, I observed my mother navigating this new social territory, introducing herself to my friends, engaging thoughtfully in discussions about the book and the legislation, carefully avoiding dominating conversations as she might have in the past. She was different, humbler, yet somehow more authentic than the mother I had known before. When Jessica proposed a toast, raising her glass to celebrate the book's release, my mother remained quiet until everyone else had spoken. Then, hesitantly, she raised her own glass. "If I may," she began, looking to me for permission to speak. At my nod, she continued. "I just want to say how proud I am, not just of this book or the legislation, impressive as they are, but of the person Sarah has become. A person of integrity, compassion, and remarkable resilience." Her voice wavered slightly. Most parents hope to inspire their children through positive example. I took a different path. But watching Sarah transform the worst experience of her life into a mission to help others has been the greatest lesson of my own life. The room fell silent, the raw honesty of her words hanging in the air. Then Jessica, ever my protector, skillfully redirected the conversation to lighter topics, allowing the emotional moment to settle without becoming overwhelming. Later, as guests began to depart, my mother prepared to leave as well. "This was lovely, Sarah. Thank you for including me." "I'm glad you came," I said, and meant it. "It felt right, having you here," she smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way that reminded me of happier times. "Your friends are wonderful. Jessica especially. You're lucky to have her in your life." "I know," I agreed. "She was my rock through everything." "As it should be," my mother said softly. "That's what I failed to be for you, but I'm grateful others stepped in where I failed." As I closed the door behind her, I felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over me. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy me had instead become the foundation for something meaningful, not just professionally, but personally as well. I had not only survived, I had found a way to thrive. In the years that followed, my work expanded in ways I could never have anticipated. The book became a bestseller, offering hope to countless victims of familiar fraud. The legislation we had championed was adopted in 43 states. And the restorative justice program, now a national model, had facilitated healing for hundreds of families fractured by financial betrayal. My relationship with my mother continued to evolve, never returning to blind trust, but gradually building toward a more honest connection than we had ever shared before. Her work with reformed offenders complemented my advocacy for victims, creating a powerful combined perspective that helped bridge the gap between justice and reconciliation. On particularly difficult days, when I encountered victims whose pain was still raw and whose futures seemed hopelessly damaged, I would share my own journey, not as a guaranteed roadmap, but as evidence that healing was possible, that betrayal need not define one's entire life story. The person who hurt you does not get to determine your worth, I would tell them. They do not get to decide your future. That power belongs to you alone. Words I had finally come to believe about myself. 5 years to the day after discovering those fraudulent credit cards, I stood on a different stage, a TED Talk platform where I had been invited to speak about financial betrayal and recovery. As the audience applauded my introduction, I took a moment to scan the faces before me, strangers whose lives might be changed by what I was about to share, just as mine had been transformed by a painful truth that ultimately set me free. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," I began, "and my identity was stolen by the person who gave it to me in the first place, my mother." In the front row, my mother nodded encouragingly, no longer hiding from the truth of what she had done, but instead helping me use that truth to light the way for others still lost in darkness. Quote, "This is not a story about victimhood," I continued. "It's a story about reclamation, about discovering that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can lead us to our most authentic selves, if we have the courage to use our pain as a compass rather than an anchor." As I shared our journey, the betrayal, the arrest, the long road to accountability and healing, I saw in the audience's response that unmistakable recognition, the relief of being understood, the tentative hope that perhaps their own stories might not end in permanent devastation either. "I stand before you today not as someone who has forgotten or minimized what happened," I concluded, "but as someone who refused to let it define everything that came after. The credit cards my mother opened fraudulently have long since been closed. The debt has been resolved. But the true restoration, the rebuilding of identity, purpose, and even relationship, that is the ongoing work of a lifetime, work that has proven more valuable than I could have ever imagined." The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for me, I knew. It was for everyone who had ever had to rebuild from betrayal, for everyone who had found the courage to create meaning from suffering, for everyone who had discovered that sometimes our deepest wounds can become our greatest sources of wisdom, if we are brave enough to look directly at them, learn from them, and ultimately use them to light the way for others. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.